Our next topic before we head to a break is our environment. We have two staff that run our environmental center. Todd Myers is our director and Brandon Housekeeper is our policy analyst. So Todd's going to start and then turn over to Brandon. I mentioned our annual dinner on October 6th, the great place for candidates to be. Todd and Brandon are putting on a half-day environmental conference next Thursday. There's an invitation on the left side of your packet. It's a half-day conference. You can come to some of the panels or to the lunch only. We have, again, some corporate tables that are looking for candidates to host. So if you want to go to that, let me know. I'll turn over to Todd.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Wow, that was pretty good. So I'm Todd Myers. I'm the environmental director at the Washington Policy Center. I come about this position, you can decide for yourself, legitimately or illegitimately. I used to work for the State Department of Natural Resources, and then enjoyed working there, but decided that doing this and working at public policy and making the policy was more interesting than working at A&R. So I want to talk about a variety of things. There are two messages that I'm going to leave with you today. The one is that innovation is more sustainable than regulation. And I think that when we focus on trying to improve the environment again and again, what you see is the long-term, most effective solutions to environmental sustainability come from innovation and technology, not from regulation. The second thing is that Reggie Jackson should have won the Nobel Prize in economics. Reggie Jackson, one of the greatest home run hitters of all time, was asked one time about facing Nolan Ryan, because Nolan Ryan was a notorious fastball hitter, or a fastball pitcher, best strikeout pitcher of all time, and he was asked, "You're a power hitter, you like fastballs, right? Don't you like facing Nolan Ryan?" And he said, "Every hitter likes fastballs, just like everybody likes ice cream. You don't like it when somebody's stuffing it down you by the gallon." That's how you feel when Nolan Ryan is throwing balls by you. And this is really the concept between the 2009 Nobel Prize in economics. Elinor Ostrom, who was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics. And her basic message, people claim it's a Chinese proverb. I'm not sure really it's a Chinese proverb, but it is, the man who says it can't be done should get out of the way of the woman who's doing it. She exemplifies that, because what?
All right, Dan. There you go again.
What we've been told is that we can't have environmental sustainability without government regulation, because people will exploit the resources, and unless you have government come in and change the way that they're using the resources, they'll just use up all the resources until they're gone. It's called the tragedy of the commons. Okay? So if nobody owns the property rights to the fish in the ocean, all the fishermen will just go out there and grab as many fish as they can, because every fish they leave isn't a fish that's going to provide sustainable fisheries for the future. It's a fish that's going to be caught by somebody else. So you might as well grab as much as you can. And so she studied this around the world to say, how do we deal with this problem? Okay, where there aren't defined property rights. And what she found is that around the world that people figured out ways to do this in a voluntary cooperative way using market forces. And what's more, when government came in and imposed solutions on them and said, here's how you're going to do it, it created all sorts of problems, because the people who were involved, they weren't bought in, they had incentives to cheat, enforcement was very difficult, and the systems collapsed. Okay? So everybody likes fastballs except when they're being stuffed down your throat by the gallon. Everybody likes environmental sustainability except when the rules are being stuffed down your throat. When you give people individual incentives to find ways to promote environmental sustainability, to use resources better, they will do it their way, and they will do it better than when the government comes in and imposes it. That's why Reggie Jackson should have won the Nobel Prize. So the basic choice is this, is that political solutions fail to promote sustainability. When you impose the solutions, they don't work very well. You have cookie-cutter approaches that don't meet the individual needs, and so they fail. But the free market actually does work, because people make the best decisions for themselves with information that only they have. If we're trying to use less energy for whatever reason, carbon emissions, we want to be independent of foreign oil, whatever else, the solutions for every one of us is different. Some of us can drive less. Right? Some of us will buy more fuel-efficient vehicles. Some of us will carpool. Some of us will telecommute. All of those things are different. And for each one of us, the answer is different. But if we set a goal of everybody's going to drive 10% fewer miles, well, that doesn't work for everybody. And what ends up happening is we miss lots and lots of opportunities to improve efficiency. Okay? The other thing is that prosperity gives us the resources to invest in consistent environmental improvement. The Prius is not the most popular sort of environmental car because it's cheap. You actually spend more extra to get a hybrid than you save in gasoline. The only reason that people are buying those cars is because they're prosperous. They have the money to spend, they have the disposable income to buy an environmental amenity. And that environmental amenity is fuel efficiency, because they don't want to put carbon or other things into the air, or they want to look cool to their friends because they have a Prius or whatever else. But they're doing it because they are prosperous. And that prosperity is what allows us to have environmental sustainability. It is no accident that the richest countries in the world also have the cleanest air, the cleanest water, and healthiest forests. You don't find deforestation in the United States. You find it in Madagascar. Ultimately, creativity and technology work better than trying to get people to change their lifestyles in the way that you want them to. So, what does that mean for environmental policy today? Let me just give one example. The state and the federal government have promoted biofuels. It's been the big wave in the last 5 to 6 years. So, Congressional Budget Office recently noted that tax credits encourage the production and sale of biofuels in the U.S. Federal mandates specify minimum amounts and types of biofuel usage each year through 2022. And the state requires biofuels to be blended with fuel. So this is a gas pump in Washington State. You've seen this sticker that says it's up to 10% ethanol. Right? We require a certain percentage of all fuels to include ethanol or biodiesel. Okay? This is the standard approach that we take to environmental policy, which is that you choose a technology, biofuels. It's going to save us. It's going to, we're going to live with rainbows and unicorns because we've mandated this technology. So you mandate the chosen technology, and then you provide subsidies and regulations to back up that technology. But the problem is that often fails, because it's very hard to choose the right technology. It hasn't created jobs. So the Grays Harbor biofuel refinery has laid off workers and is not running at capacity. It's running well below capacity. And earlier this year, the owners of that had joined others in lobbying Congress for more subsidies. They can't run without the subsidies, and they're not creating the jobs. I have to do a disclaimer here that I do public relations work, and they actually hired me to do the announcement of the building of that. And they claimed at the time that they were going to create all sorts of jobs. It was going to help Grays Harbor, deal with the loss of logging jobs and other things like that. It hasn't panned out that much. The CBO, that same report that I just quoted, said that the cost to reduce gas consumption by 1 gallon using biofuels is $1.78 for ethanol and $3 for cellulosic ethanol, and biodiesel is $2.55. These prices this is how much they subsidize each gallon. Wow. Okay. So you pay, when you go and you pay, like, what is it, Propel biodiesel that's in Seattle, we have a little station, and they say it's $3, and it's basically the same price as gasoline, maybe a little bit higher. It's actually $4.78. The real cost of that gallon of gas is $4.78, but we pick up about a third of the cost. With cellulosic, which is wood and agricultural waste and other things like that, which is not as developed a technology, it's higher. It's $3.
So where do we insert that money into the process?
Subsidies primarily for farmers.
So basically, the money is coming from the federal government to the farmers who are producing the raw materials that get turned into ethanol.
Correct. There's also a subsidy for domestic biofuel production, and what that subsidy has done actually is create a strange unintended consequence. Is that the export subsidy? It's an export subsidy because we want to create an export. We want to make it domestically and ship it and sell it to other countries. So if you export biofuels from the U.S. to another country, you get a subsidy. The subsidy is so high that foreign countries are shipping their biofuels the raw biofuel to the US, mixing it with the gasoline or diesel, and then re-shipping it back over the ocean to the country because the transportation costs are cheaper than the subsidy.
So we're subsidizing other countries' biofuels.
We're subsidizing other countries' biofuels, and we're subsidizing an increase in energy use and carbon emissions.
So it's creating jobs
Somewhere, yeah.
government jobs.
And not only does that harm the environment, but it doesn't help the environment. The best way to understand, one of the arguments that I make constantly is waste of money is waste of resources. Because there's lots of things we can do to help the environment. And if you're spending money on things that don't help the environment, you're not spending money on things that do. You're wasting money. And we are wasting a tremendous amount of money. The cost per ton of CO2 reduced is $750 for ethanol, $275 for cellulosic ethanol, and $300 for biodiesel. So what do those numbers mean? In Europe right now, on their carbon market, you can buy a ton of CO2, 18 bucks. If you buy a carbon allocation in Europe, because they have a cap and trade system, right? So if you want to emit a ton of CO2, you have to have a carbon allocation credit. If I went and bought for $18 a carbon allocation credit and put it in my pocket, that means that somebody can't emit a ton of CO2. Okay. We're spending $750 per ton. So how many tons of CO2 could we reduce for every 1 ton that we actually are reducing? If we simply took that money and went to Europe and started buying up carbon credits, we could reduce CO2 emissions a lot more than we're doing with this. So it doesn't even help the environment, okay? That's what this biofuel, that's the failure. So why do we fall for these sorts of fads? Because these things are trends, right? People say, oh, here's the solution, and everybody latches onto the solution. There's a variety of reasons we do it. Well, policymakers and elected officials, one, obviously they want to appeal to special interest groups, right? An environmental or other special interest group, or businesses do this a lot too. They say, we have the solution. If you only subsidize us, you'll have the solution, and then we'll all support you, right? So the solar panel manufacturers, the environmental groups come to you and say, if you support these policies, we're behind you 100%. And if you don't have strong feelings one way or another, or you don't have the information, you're going to say, okay, I'll do that. The other thing is it provides search satisfaction. So when you're a policymaker and somebody says, global warming is a problem, we need a solution, and somebody says, I have the solution, what happens? You get a warm feeling, I found the solution, right? I've upheld my promise to the voters that I have found the solution to this problem that is real. Not just to the voters, but that's why all of you are running, right? You want to find solutions to the problems that you think face the country and the state. It's understandable. And when somebody comes to you with a solution, and it sounds good, you're going to say, oh, thank God we got the solution. I can put this aside and move on to the next problem. So we latch on to things that we think are solutions. Unfortunately, many of these things are not actually solutions. But we don't want to give up the warm feeling in our heart by finding out, yeah, that actually didn't work. People do this, just average people do the same thing. It makes us feel good about ourselves. The University of Toronto did a study where they had people buy from a green store, where everything was labeled green, and from a normal store, where the same types of products, but they weren't labeled green. And then they bought online, and then they gave them another test, which they told them, well, this is an unrelated test. And it had to deal with honesty, and about, you took a test, and then based on your score, you took money out of an envelope based on your score. But nobody checked to see whether they took the right amount of money. So what they would do is they would go back and say, okay, did people take the correct amount of money, or did they fudge? And what they found is that people who bought at the green store were less honest than people who bought at the normal store. So why is this? Because when people buy green stuff, they feel like, I've done my good deed, right? I'm a good person. This shows that I'm a good person. So if I cheated over here a little bit, I've still helped the world. What this shows is not that greens are bad people, because we see this in other areas. When people do good things, they can cheat in other areas. But what it shows is that it's a very powerful part of environmentalism, which is making yourself feel good. And it leads us to bad conclusions, because since making ourselves feel good is such an important part of why we choose the green policies we do, we tend to choose policies that make us feel good rather than those that are difficult but may help the environment.
Probably one of the biggest environmental issues we have in this area is water runoff into the Puget Sound, the surface runoff issue.
Yeah.
Do you have a position or a strategy to deal with that issue?
It's a very difficult issue, and it is emblematic of so many of the issues we deal with. It used to be very easy to deal with point source problems. So right, when you have air pollution, you have a factory, and you deal with the factory.
Right.
Runoff, which is now, I agree, the biggest challenge we have in Puget Sound, is very difficult because it's everywhere.
Right.
So what you have to do is you have to provide community-wide and other things, other incentives to deal with that. So there's no single solution. That's the challenge, is that there's lots of different things you have to do. So we did a report, which is in your packets, about the policies that are working and that are not working. And one of the things that we say is working or has the potential to work is the Puget Sound Partnership, although we're not to be critical of them. But projects that reduce failing septic systems is one piece of the pie. Some of the things we've done with bioswales is another piece of the pie. We don't do a very good job at promoting water conservation, which is different than the runoff issue a little bit, but we price water for ease of use. So people in their houses, we keep the prices down so they can take long showers and things like that. We don't really punish them very much for doing things like that. If we allocated water better, then farmers and other folks who really want water would be able to get a hold of it, rather than me spending an extra 10 minutes in my shower, which I probably shouldn't, because that water is more valuable. So there's a variety of small things. So I could talk to you about this more. I'm trying to move along, but there's a lot of small things as opposed to.
Do you have a position paper someplace on this?
We haven't. We've done some work. Take a look at that. I can get you more information of what we've done. We're actually doing more on the Puget Sound Partnership. They're coming out with their recommendations for priorities based on the science later this year. So we're going to take a look at that. I think that will be useful. So I apologize, I don't have more, and I need to move on. So, but let's talk about it. Yeah.
Do you think large buffers along the shoreline help with water runoff?
It depends. It really depends. So at the Department of Natural Resources, we have buffers along all of our forest lands. And one of the big reasons is because of concern about erosion into the streams, because getting silt into the streams is very bad for the fish. But the vast majority, something like 95% of the benefits to those streams comes from the first 50 feet of buffers. Our buffers in Washington State are like 100 to 150 to 200 feet. Okay. So what is that extra 100, 150 feet? Well, that actually was put in there to achieve other habitat goals, like old growth and things like that. But people have come to think that we need these massive buffers to protect the streams. But in fact, you do need some buffer, but not nearly the size we're talking about. So that's the challenge. And let me just make this last point about scientists. The problem is that when you're told we need this huge buffer, what are you told? Well, this is the best available science. That's nonsense, okay? Because what they're doing is the science ends here, and what they're adding is their own personal values. So when I was at DNR, I asked a bird biologist, what do we do to protect the spotted owl? And she said, you have your habitat, as marbled murrelet, I'm sorry, marbled murrelet. You have your habitat that you know, and then what we need to do is we need to protect that habitat, so we need to put a buffer around that habitat, okay? And then I went to a forester, and I said, how do we protect the marbled murrelet? And he said, we need to manage forests the way they've been managed forever, with forest fire, right? So you have some stands that are brand new, and some stands that are old growth, and everything in between. And this mosaic, all these habitat types, right? It's an ecosystem. It's not a homogeneous, it's a system. There's all these different types of habitat. And all of that works together to create healthy forests and healthy habitat. So who was following the science? They both were, right? So why is it that they gave totally different answers to that question? And the answer is their personal values and their personal risk tolerance. So when somebody comes to you and says, your buffer needs to be 200 feet, why? Because they have a very low risk tolerance for runoff or impact on habitat, because they're fish biologists or something, right? They care tremendously, and the last thing they want to do is to see any impact. They frankly, your prosperity, your beach, whatever, they don't really care about. So what they're doing is they're fitting the science to their own personal values. That's why even scientists can fall for eco-fads, because what they do is they mix their personal values into what the science actually says. They don't tell you where the science begins and ends. So the problem is that these actually harm the environment because we set the wrong priorities. And we spend our time and money on things that are not big priorities. So this is a chart that I just saw yesterday from the Sightline Institute, who's sort of our ideological counterpart on the left. But I thought this was a great chart, and they make a really good point here, because what they're arguing is, we're fighting about paper or plastic and banning plastic bags, but that doesn't make a very big difference. They're arguing for vegetarianism. I don't agree with that, and I question the methodology here a little bit, but their basic point is right, is a plastic bag uses this much energy, a paper bag uses this much energy, but your diet, what goes in the bag, uses this much energy. Where are we focusing all of our time and energy? We're focusing on this. We're not talking about this. We do that all the time. Plastic bags are a very easy target because they're bad, and you can see them in trash, and everybody hates trash and litter. So we spend our time focusing on this rather than the real problems. That's the thing that eco-fads do, is that we get sucked into biofuels or other things that take our eye off the ball, and we don't focus on the real issues. How much time am I running?
You guys have about 7 minutes, but that includes Brandon.
That includes Brandon. Well, I'm in trouble. So, let's move on. Where does this lead? This leads to Spain and China. I just got back from Spain. There are windmills on every hill. The problem is they have 20% unemployment. 2 years ago, all we used to hear about was, look at what Spain is doing. They're investing in green energy. We need to be more like Spain.
No, we don't.
When was the last time you heard somebody say we need to be more like Spain? Right? They have 20% unemployment. So they just changed the word. They just changed the word from Spain to China. Now, what we all hear is we need to be more like China because they're investing on the green jobs and green economy, and they're rushing ahead of us. And Thomas Friedman on one of the Sunday talk shows said, I have this dream that we could be more like China, and just instead of having to go through this democratic process, just force these things through, and we'd be so much better off. He's crazy, right? Spain just did this. They're in huge trouble, and this is a Spanish newspaper that came out earlier this year. And since I just went to Spain, I can read this. It says, Spain admits that the green economy it sold to Obama is a ruin. And that's Zapatero, their prime minister, and their But that's where that leads.
But is their economy in a shambles because they went green? Or did they just happen to go into a shambles anyway, and the green didn't help them?
Believe me, that, they elected a socialist prime minister, and their economy was in bad shape before then. But this has only made it worse. This is
right. So it wasn't a remedy at all. No. It wasn't a remedy.
Correct. But it's compounded the problem. It's not.
Okay. How has it? Just to again come back. How has it compounded their problem?
Because they have huge budget deficits. The subsidies for green energy are massive. In fact, they're so massive that they actually end up having to have a lottery for the subsidies because everybody wanted to get them, right? It's free money. Everybody wanted to go get the free money. And so many people came forward that they had to do a lottery. I mean, that's how they're essentially handing out money because they're subsidizing it to try to create green energy. Now those are the very programs that they're having to cut because they don't have any more.
I guess this is the thing that, as an investor, I've looked at alternative energy for years. And frankly, most of it doesn't pencil out. And that's really what you're saying. I mean, we are continuing to invest in alternative energy solutions that aren't economic solutions and don't have the opportunity to become economic solutions, is really the core point that you're trying to make.
Absolutely. And the reason we do that is because people come to us and say, this is gonna solve all of our problems, and then we say, okay, thank God, now I have a solution, here's money.
So what are some that pencil out from your perspective? What are some of the alternative energies that are truly economic?
I don't know, and it's not my job to know, and it's not your job to know. You know whose job it is to know? 300 million people. Because there are some people for whom alternative energy makes no difference. And if somebody says the science says this, the science doesn't say anything. The science says, gives you an indication of what's good, what are the risks are. That's the best way to put it. What are the risks? And then you say, okay, how risk tolerant am I? Do I care about this or do I care about this? Okay, I'm willing to take this risk to try to get this benefit over here. And that's why the same science is interpreted differently by different scientists, because they have different levels of risk tolerance.
If anybody wants a prime example of markets and how they work with environmentals, look at data centers and how they've increased technology over the last 10 years. It is impossible to build a data center right now without doing everything you can to be energy efficient. And if you're not energy efficient and decrease your power consumption by 60 or 70%, they're not moving into your data center. And that's not based on regulations, that's based on the market driving those efficiencies.
Talking of market, you referenced European cap and trade, carbon, the carbon market or buying out solution as you described, versus carbon taxes. Comment.
So what's the difference between cap and trade and a carbon tax? Cap and trade sets, here's the limit, here's how much CO2 that we can emit economy-wide, and then we allocate it based on people buying the credits, and the price of those credits go up or down based on the demand. Okay? So you set an absolute cap. The problem is that cap may be easy to meet one year and difficult to meet the next. If we have a hot, dry year, and guess what? We don't have any hydropower, we're gonna all of a sudden we're gonna go to Montana and buy a heck of a lot of coal. So our carbon emissions are gonna go through the roof all of a sudden, simply because one year we had to do that. But the cap is firm, so we can't, there's no flexibility year to year. The next year we have an unbelievable amount of snowpack, and then the price plummets because we easily make the cap. And that's what you've seen in Europe, is very volatile energy prices. Do volatile energy prices have a good or bad impact on the economy? Bad. Okay. A carbon tax, however, evens that out. If you say, here's an app, we're just going to put a basic price on this. In years when you can buy technology that's cheaper than that carbon tax, you'll do it. In years when you can't, you'll pay that price. But you have some predictability about, here's what the costs are going to be. And it smooths out over the long run, which is why Barack Obama's own budget advisor says cap and trade is bad, a carbon tax is good. We believe that there is some risk from climate change and that you should do something to reduce those risks. We don't believe that the risk is what Al Gore says it is. We think that's silly. But there is some risk. And so, if you're a business person and you see that there is risk, you want to buy an insurance policy of the appropriate size, that's the key, of the appropriate size to deal with that risk. We think taxes are too high as it is. So what we would say is, take taxes, cut taxes on capital investment, which promotes innovation, and replace a portion of that tax with a carbon price to raise energy prices. Okay? So, overall, it's a tax cut. And the beauty is, you can't avoid property taxes. If you have property, you pay. You can't avoid business and occupation taxes, right? Unless you make less money, which you don't want to do. You can't avoid sales taxes unless you stop buying things. You can't avoid energy taxes by becoming more efficient or changing. Right? Something you can control as opposed to something you can't. So that's a better approach for a variety.
So you advocate carbon tax?
We do, as long in the context of an overall tax cut.
Forgive me if I miss something since I came in late.
No worries.
But what I struggle with is when you read scientific research, or supposedly scientific research, when you read research to back up policy, is it your recommendation that you pull out your basic principles of research? So, for example, the more volume of your subject matter, the greater the accuracy of the outcome, because you're using a bigger pool.
Bigger sample.
Yeah, bigger sample. I tend to want to apply those principles as I'm reading through research and then weight it. But that takes a lot of time, and so as a legislator, time is of essence. And is there an are there some easy ways to approach the research without sacrificing those basic scientific?
So how do you deal with science when you're not a scientist? Very difficult. Einstein disagreed with everybody. Who was right? Okay? So when you say, well, everybody says this and this knucklehead with crazy hair says this, who am I going to believe? The crazy haired guy was right. So it's very difficult to look at the science when you're not a scientist, and sometimes even when you are, because you're a biologist and what you're dealing with in forestry. So what you have to do is you have to do your best to get a sense of what the science is,
And apply those principles?
Okay. But then don't be afraid to say, what do I think is important? What are the risks I'm willing to take?
Yeah, okay.
And if I think right now that we need to put people back to work and get jobs, then I'm going to be willing to risk a little more environmental impact for a little more job creation. Okay? Or I'm going to risk a little more forest fire for a little more habitat. Okay? So I mean, whatever you have to do that. There's a myth that doesn't go on when you deal with science, that the science is this and you must follow it. That's nonsense. And this gives me and thank you very much, because all of you should come to our conference next Thursday to hear Roger Pelkey Jr., who talks exactly about this. He's fantastic. He works with the IPCC. He doesn't work with them, but he criticizes them and looks at their research and says, here's the scientific problems that they're making or they're causing because they're not following their principles. They're masking that risk assessment as science.
I was more concerned on the upfront analysis, that the principle of science, that this is a research. This is the research, Eleanor, the document, the text, whoever wrote the text, the attitude, the
Frequently, we don't have the time to do that. I mean, that's the,
okay, that's what I'm getting at.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, and so is this speaker next Thursday going to talk possibly about those intricacies of?
Yes. He'll talk about how you deal with that, and then how, as a policymaker, you can apply what that science says, what the strengths and weaknesses are to policy.
Time management.
All right, so now I'm really in trouble, so I'm just going to wrap up really quickly, and then I'll answer your question. So, just I want to leave you with a couple of things. One, that innovation is the most effective way to deal with these problems. You can't take innovation back. Right? Once we invent something, we don't forget it. You can change regulation. The governor had these energy policies, these retrofit policies and other things that were going to be put into effect that came out of the climate advisory team. They were supposed to go into effect. What did she do? She postponed them. Why? Because the economic impact was too big. When priorities change, you can swap out regulations, you can change, and you can do all sorts of things. That's horrible for the long-term sustainability of the environment, because the environment doesn't change overnight, it changes over long periods of time. If you're trying to change a forest from a situation where it's unhealthy to where it's healthy, it takes 40, 60, 100 years. If you're changing your policies constantly, because that doesn't work. Innovation, though, can't be taken back. This is CO2 emissions per unit of gross domestic product. From 1980 through 2006, it's been cut by almost 50%. What government regulation did this? None. It's people who don't want to spend money on energy and are finding ways to be more efficient day after day. And you notice that the line doesn't all of a sudden go like that and then level off. It's constant, every day, consistent, driving it downwards. That's what innovation does, and it's good for the long term, right? You may see that suddenly go up a little bit. I mean, there's little places where it sort of flattens out, but you're not going to see it go up like that. It's going to keep going. You had a question, or was it answered?
Oh, I was just going to ask if the speaker next Thursday is going to speak to intercepting emails and how to interpret them for manipulation of data.
Yes, he'll talk about climate.
You said, last slide, for gross domestic product. So, but in fact, if you were to look at the actual amount of emissions, it would be increasing.
That's correct. So this is not per capita,
Right.
because because our economy is growing and because there are more people, the actual amount of, it's actually pretty flat. This improvement actually offsets the growth and other things. So our emissions is actually kind of flat right now, but it's not going down.
Yours doesn't work in the per gross domestic product, right? If you
Right.
look at- okay.
Absolutely, but what this shows is that we're becoming more efficient. And maybe we need to become more efficient more rapidly, but the point is basically that the reason that we're flat right now is not because of regulation.
Right.
Regulation has not held our CO2 emissions flat. The natural drive of technology has.
Could that also be because we ship a lot of our manufacturing jobs out of country?
Wrong.
Thank you.
What year did the United States manufacturing production peak? Anybody guess? What year did did the total amount of output, not jobs, but output? 50s? Who else? What guess?
1900?
World War II? 2008.
That's 2 years ago.
2008. The reason that we have fewer manufacturing jobs is innovation, right? Technology. It makes it so that we can produce more with less. It's the same reason that the number of agricultural jobs we have today is less than it was in 1850, because innovation has reduced it. The strongest period that we had of economic growth was from 1994 through the current recession. NAFTA, right? We had 4% unemployment at one point, and yet we had lots of free trade. There was supposed to be this giant sucking sound where Mexico was going to become rich. I don't think Mexico's rich. Right? Our technology, our innovation. There's no question that labor costs are part of the calculus, but innovation is the reason that we've lost jobs in manufacturing. And what has happened during that period of time is that we've become wealthier. This is why you need to listen to Lee, because it makes education so much more important, because an educated workforce makes more money. So I have this phone, this cool iPhone that I just bought, and it says on the back, designed in California and made in China. Okay? This cost me $300. I think I read that the manufacturing and the actual materials in this, $30. $270 of this comes from the information and knowledge. That's essentially the service sector. Programmers. That's prosperity. I mean, that's real prosperity. This doesn't mean that manufacturing jobs aren't important or that we shouldn't care about them, but we need to understand why we're losing manufacturing jobs.
That's a laptop you don't have to build.
Huh?
That's a laptop you don't have to build.
Right. So, yeah, exactly. So it's fewer resources. So, anyway, I mean to be tough, but I just heard somebody say this on the radio trying to prove it. Okay, that's it. I'm almost done. Last thing is, I'm going to point out dolphin-safe tuna. Why do we have dolphin-safe tuna? Because the government regulated dolphin-safe tuna? No, because Starkist and other folks said, if we put dolphin-safe tuna on our cans, people will buy them. They were right. Because of prosperity, because of the free market, because of marketing. That's the way to do this. Don't fall for eco-facts, right? The real creativity, the real solutions are among the people in this audience and the people all across the state. And if you give them incentives to find ways to improve the economy, to reduce their resource use, they will. They always have. The man who says it can't be done should get out of the way of the woman who is doing it. Government says the free market can't do it. They should get out of the way because the free market already is. Thanks.